Okay, guys, I'm sorry. I misled things here. You clicked on the video. The video title says books to movies. And to be fair, I will be analyzing Ready Player One. I recently listened to the audiobook and then re-watched the movie. The other example that I want to go over is The Last of Us, which was a video game turned into a TV show. So definitely different mediums there. But the concepts of what I'm trying to talk about is still the same, of just translating from one medium to another. That's what we're here to talk about. And when it comes to books to movies, there are endless examples that we can siphon through of this is how this book was, this is how the movie compared. So I wanted to kind of keep things in general, but also give some specific examples as well. So Ready Player One is going to be the focus for one thing, but I'm also going to talk about The Last of Us as well. I really like that I want to look at Ready Player One because there's a lot of differences between the two. The movie focuses on three main trials. All three trials have differences for the movie compared to what was in the book. But besides those changes, there's still a lot of aspects that fundamentally stayed the same as well, and there's also a good amount of differences. There's actually a lot to break down and analyze and be able to kind of understand the mindset between the two. Now, the first call out to make is that technically speaking, I didn't read the book. I listened to the audiobook version narrated by Wil Wheaton, so that already is skewing my perspective of how I viewed everything. It's from the narration of the main character, Percival, or Z, or Wade Watts. But with the narration of Wil Wheaton already, I'm now interpreting things differently than how I would have read them in my head if I actually read the book. So before I talk through and analyze any differences between anything, just a quick rundown. There is this virtual reality called the Oasis that was created, and it's been this form of escapism that has really taken over the world and has taken over people's lives. And that includes our main character, Parzival, who is what is called a gunter, someone that goes out and is taking on missions and ultimately has this goal of grabbing the Easter egg at the end of this world. The guy who created the Oasis, he passed away, and he created this game where you have to complete these three trials in order to get the Easter egg at the end, which grants you the key to the Oasis and basically promises billions of dollars of wealth, and you'll be set up for life. And before we talk about any other plot details, spoiler warning, okay? It has to be. I can't talk about differences well and the way I want to without going into spoilers. Go read the book, go watch the movie, whatever you want, or don't, and just watch this video. I'm not gonna give away every single thing, but there will be spoilers, so just a heads up there. Now, one of the first differences to mention, just one that kind of comes up in my mind first, is Parzival's relationship with Artemis. It's something that, again, Parzival gets set up as someone who works on his own, although he works with his best friend and they kind of chat about stuff, but they very much are in agreement that they work on their own. At least the book does that. And Artemis is this online presence that is also vocal about working on her own as well, but has already a social presence. And they end up connecting, and they are going this bond over the course of the book. And it comes to a point where Parzival thinks he's in love, and that steers Artemis away. And for the longest time in the book, she kind of just holds it against him and redirects her focus completely onto the game. And Parzival spends some time on his own, just self-discovery journey. It's not until the very end of the book, like literally the final battle basically, where they kind of rekindle. And that's different with the movie. With the movie, it's still they meet, and because it's a movie, because there's limited time, because there's so much to get through of material, it's a pretty quick relationship. Like, they hit it off, and it's like, cool. They kiss, and then Parzival gets in too deep. So it follows the same structure of Artemis pulls away from him, redirects her focus once again, but it also only takes a few scenes for them to kiss and make up, and they're the clear love interests. So it's more of a stereotypical journey from the movie perspective of how the characters act. There's a lot of pacing stuff that leads into that. So that's just one thing that, sure, the overall journey of what they take together, that relationship plot of this story is the same, but anyone that actually read the book will know that it feels very different. But before we talk more about differences, let's pause. Okay, because I want to set things up. I want to kind of talk more about the in general approach of how I am directing this video. Because I think it's a fair statement to say that in general, people tend to like the books more than the movies. To varying degrees, people that have seen/read both will say that, hey, they enjoyed the movie, they think the movie is fine, or on the other side of the spectrum, they throw an existential crisis because why could they possibly do that to my character? They ruined this for me. They sully the name of the book. How dare they ever create a movie? Why would they do this to me? That sort of response, right? To me, the way that you can sum this up is if you ask people which one they thought was better, the standard response I think of is a shoulder shrug and, well, the book was better. And I think there are examples that you can think of, although I never read the series, and I actually didn't see the second movie. From what I've heard, the second Percy Jackson movie just completely obliterates the story. It tries fitting in so many plot lines from lots of the other books. The studio just had its hand in way too much of the creative decision making, and from what I've seen and what I've heard from people, no one really enjoyed the second movie. It kind of just crashed that movie franchise. So there's examples that you can clearly point to say, well, they just ruined that. And okay, fair enough. But my goal with this video is still to fundamentally change the mindset that most people have. My opinion is that books and movies are totally separate mediums where you are spending hours upon hours with the character's thoughts and a different side of the journey when reading the book, versus the audio and visual spectacle of a 2-hour movie that you instead see. You are never going to gain the level of character detail that a book is able to outline from a film, but on the flip side of that, you actually have this opportunity to set these visuals and these landscapes that actually painting a picture instead of just people having their creative minds elaborate on these landscapes instead. You have the ability to say, look, this is the interpretation. This is words on a page. And now you can visualize it. When I say I want to fundamentally change people's mindsets on this topic, first example I actually think of is Harry Potter. Read all the books, and there was definitely overlap between reading the books and when the movies came out. And it's been well over a decade since I've read or watched any of the movies. My experience from what I remember is that I kind of end up with a bit of short-term memory. And I remember really enjoying the books. And then I remember going to see the movies, and sure, there will be moments where I'm like, yeah, that's not a scene that I remember from the book, or there will be stuff where I think, oh yeah, they did change that up a little bit, didn't they? But beyond that, I also just kind of remember just enjoying the movies, and enjoying what they were for what they were as well. So let's break this down a little bit. because there are different criteria that we should be looking for when we're coming to our judgments. To me, if the fundamental aspects of the book have not changed, that's when I think we should just enjoy each one for what it is. I read Jurassic Park after watching the movie. Both are by Michael Crichton, my favorite author, and he did the screenplay for it. And he changed stuff up. He changed up actually who lives and who dies. And I think it worked very well with how the perspective switches for the movie. But there's also just like level of dino science details that Michael Crichton, he loves bringing some science faction into his books. There's that level of detail that you get in the books that you don't get in the movies. And you know what? It works well there as well. I think another great example that a lot of people, you can just see in an infinite amount of places online, would be The Lord of the Rings. Same deal, read the books after I watched the movies. I was actually very impressed when I was reading the book, and really I was picturing a lot of stuff from the movies. Even some of the scenes that didn't make it to the movies, I could still vividly picture because the movies basically encapsulated a lot of things. But if you look at each of them, there's differences, and there has to be differences. In terms of how we engage with the characters in a book, you want to spend more time with them at once, and you want to be able to keep that attention span with these characters. It's hard to switch those perspectives back and forth suddenly if you don't give any heads-up warning. Versus keeping the attention span over 2 hours, you just need to approach things differently. With a movie, and if you're trying to build up tension, or if you're just trying to build up different levels of themes, then it might work better to cut back and forth between these characters and this journey and where they're at versus over here. And that's what you see with The Lord of the Rings. It mixes and matches the movies with each of the characters and where they're at with their journeys way more than all of the time we intimately spend in the books with each portion of the characters and their journeys, especially in books 2 to 3. But it works, and it's something that people enjoy them both, and there's good reason for that too. It's because what they translated from the story made sense for what they were trying to accomplish. But with that being said, movies are going to change stuff up, and that could be for whatever reason. Very often you hear it's a pacing issue, or they just simply decide they wanted to focus on a specific character, either more or less, or combine 2 characters from a book and turn them into one character into the movie. In the case of Ready Player One, one of the first things that you'll notice is just how different the first gate is, which it's a giant race. It's very visually splendid and attention-grabbing and loud and busy in the movie. That's way different than the off-beaten path of finding a cave and then playing against this demon in kind of like a board game style theme for the book. Way, way different. But why did they make that different? And there's actually reasons for that. With the book, the setup with Parzival is we have to spend a lot of time just building up this universe and building up what it is, who our character is, and it really details through how Parzival doesn't have great family connections, how he doesn't have any money, how really for the past 5 years he's been dedicating his entire life to the Oasis to create a better life for himself by winning the game. That's who he is. He's this lone gunter, and that's the key message of what we're building up, and it takes a long time. We see the struggles of him going through class, barely being a high-level ranking character at all because he just can't afford to go on any of the cool missions. A lot of that is built up, and when he gets to the first gate, he is able to discover it kind of by accident. Not really by accident, he still uses his skills, but it's a huge coincidence that the same planet that he's located on is where the first gate ends up being. Which is lucky for him, but if there's another person that's also in the Oasis, they may not be so lucky. They may not be on that world, and they don't have the means to be able to travel to that world. Whereas with the movie, they bring up the point that they want the game to feel very universally obtainable. They have like this very throwaway line. It's actually a little laughable at the beginning of, someone discovered some doors, or like someone created these doors and they teleport you to the race. And it's like, sure, that was just an easy explanation, but it gets the job done. Now you have people that are all able to get to this race, and if you die on the race, you don't have to complete it, but if you die during the race, then you have to start from scratch. So now if you're low level, if you don't have much money, hey, go for it. What do you have to lose? You can just start off from where you were at, basically, if you end up dying. But if you're rich, if you've already built up a lot of time with your character, well, you might be more risk averse then. Now, on the other side of what we've been talking about, when a movie completely flips the script and completely changes things from the book, then I think it's fair game to start comparing notes. That's when it makes more sense to start seeing, did this make sense in the context of what we were trying to do? When in Ready Player One, some of the, I would say, smaller differences would be the fact that in the book, again, kind of skewed by the audiobook that I listened to, honestly, Z, kind of an annoying teenager. He got on my nerves a little bit. He definitely had a stubborn side. Whereas in the movie, he's just a more likable hero, and that is definitely in part due to Ty Sheridan. He's just a good actor, and that made a difference. I think one of the big differences is actually just how the book versus the movie is themed overall. What I mean by that is really from the setup. Again, the setup of the book is how much Z is made out to be this loner. He kind of has his side with Artemis. Sure, he ends up working together with a few other friends, but most of that really comes endgame style of just near the final act, and he goes on a bit of side missions, but it's Z's journey is what the book is. And it's how much he takes things through himself, and you kind of need it that way because he's the narrator. But the movie wanted a team. It wanted a bond between people immediately. So he's already on friendly terms with everyone kind of outside of Artemis right from the get-go. They're all already working together. That they don't actually fully team up until the very end of the book. Very different in the movie. And although how it's framed doesn't feel too different, how you perceive the story and how you just perceive where things are at feels way different overall. But when you take all of that into consideration, let me just talk a little bit more about the movie itself. I don't think it's an incredible movie, but it's a pretty visual feast. There's a lot of fun pop culture references. So many times where you can pause the screen and be like, oh, there's that. Oh, wow, they got that. Whoa, that thing's in there. Hey, I know that. You know, just like you'll catch a lot of things the first time. You'll catch even more things the second time, and you could probably watch it a third time, fourth time, fifth time, and still not notice everything that got squeaked into here, and somehow they got the licensing to throw that property in. There's stuff that I think the movie actually did a little bit better than the book. I'm thinking primarily the third gate. I think how they culminated that climactic fight worked way better than the book. I think the book took way too long to get to the ending point. And maybe, you know, again, my opinion is going to be inserted all over this video. My opinion of the book was that there was stuff that I enjoyed. There was also stuff that I critiqued. I watched the movie. I watched it way back when when it came out in theaters, and then knowing that I was going to kind of compare the two, I also rewatched it pretty recently, and I enjoyed myself. I enjoyed myself watching the movie, and definitely made some notes on like, oh wow, yeah, they definitely did change that up a decent bit. But I was still able to come away and appreciate the two. So just to wrap it up with Ready Player One, the movie I would give a solid 7 out of 10. It's highly entertaining. There's stuff I enjoyed, stuff I critiqued, and that's good enough for me. I can sleep easy knowing that I have opinions on both the book and the movie. And even with a lot of the differences, and there's a good amount of differences, even with that, I didn't feel betrayed by how they portrayed the characters in the story. And when you got Steven Spielberg working on things, you know you're gonna get some good quality moments too. So it's something that I was able to enjoy the medium for what it is. I feel like if I'm going to do such a wide-spanning topic such as converting books to movies, I can't just come in with one example, because you can just throw so many examples to skew your opinion and be like, oh, but what about in this case? What about in this case? So trying to keep the focus more narrowed, but also not just give you one example. So of course my next example is not even a book to a movie, it's a video game to a TV show. But again, I think the principle remains the same, and that's why I want to talk about The Last of Us, which is near and dear to my heart. I strongly, firmly place The Last of Us as a top 5 favorite video game of all time. Now, I did reference video games a little bit in some of the videos that I do, but I keep the focus on movies. In terms of video games, I do consider myself a gamer, and I consider myself to be more of a completionist. I definitely have an aspect of FOMO. Definitely have fear of missing out of, oh, if I don't do this side quest, was there a cool storyline that I end up missing? It's actually something that I'm trying to be a little bit less of, but just to kind of give you the mindset of how I am approaching The Last of Us as a video game. I went in and played it, probably spent, I think, probably 30 to 40 hours my first playthrough, absolutely loved it, then came back to it a few years later, went back through it again on hard mode, which meant that I died a few more times, which meant that I still spent a lot of time going through the game on hard mode as well. So the setup here is that I spent a lot of time playing this video game, and I think it's actually just a good ranging video game. You kind of tend to see a bit more now. Some video games are skewing on the shorter side of things, but especially when you're thinking of RPG elements, when you're thinking of just these incredible adventures, those can range in terms of how long they take to complete, and it can be way over 40 hours, you know, over 100 hours, depending on what you're trying to do, depending on what you're doing with the story. I think 30 to 40 is a good range of a relatively standard video game experience. And what it also means is that I literally have a controller in my hands, and for the first game you play through as Joel, and it's Joel and Ellie's journey, and so you're going to spend a lot of intimate time. I spent roughly 60 to 80 hours playing this game and experiencing their journey twice, and having their interactions feel like I'm in control by actually playing through the game. So guess what? I form this intimate bond with the characters because of how I'm interacting with it, because of the time commitment I'm giving it, which you're not going to get that same time commitment from a TV show, but it does allow for a wider range of things that you can explore and how you can expand upon some scenes, because now you can spread this out through a full season or more of episodes. So it gives you more time than just a movie, and that's what you've started to see more in recent years, is just the emergence of just high quality TV shows, because they're able to give more time dedicated to these IPs that people already have loved, whether it's been from video games or from their book series, or even from movies that they then converted to TV shows to varying degrees of success. So not going to do as many spoilers. I might throw one or two in, and I would recommend trying not to listen to this portion of the video if possible, if you want to completely experience The Last of Us as just uniquely on your own, whether that is only going to be the TV show or going to be the video game. I'll talk more about which experience I do recommend for what reason a little bit further. I think it's incredible. I love it, so I would say go watch any of that before anything is skewed from anything that I say. But it's also not going to be the end of the world if you just listen to what I say anyways. So it's what people may know is that it's a zombie infested world, but you may not know much more than that, because that's just the backdrop. You know, there's of course the emergence of The Walking Dead, where yes, you have the zombies. In the bulk of the episodes, especially I would say in later seasons, it's really the character interactions that you have, and that's why people get so heartbroken by all of these characters dying. It's because we build up all of these interactions and all of these bonds that they form that happen then to be broken away because of the zombie infested world that they live, the dire situation that they're placed in. So it increases that vulnerability to the nth degree of, oh no, what is going to happen to them? There's an innate tension built into that. So the story is that we have Joel, probably roughly around 40, maybe a little bit over 40 years old. He's got a young teenage daughter, and they're just kind of living life. It's him and Sarah. And they get thrust into the beginning of what happens of you know, friggin' the COVID, right? It's not COVID. It's just a virus. Whatever happens. They never explain zombie stuff. Why would they? But zombie stuff happens. And they have to try to survive the apocalypse. And all of a sudden, Sarah is tragically ripped away from Joel. So just, I guess it's a spoiler. It takes 20 to 30 minutes. Come on, guys. But she dies. Okay? And then we fast forward, I believe it's 20 years. And so now Joel is more like mid-50s. And he's this gruffled, grumpy man who is still surviving. And he's kind of formed a new life where, you know, he doesn't have the connections from the old world. He's learned how to survive, and you pick up on that very, very quickly. And he tends to work a little bit outside the book, where there's a structure of some cities, but there's not like a formal government here. That has all broken down. And he's more of a scavenger style person where he is willing to go past the curfews. And he ends up taking this job where he has to transport some cargo, and that cargo ends up being Ellie, who mimics the same age range as his daughter Sarah. So already you can start seeing where, okay, he lost his daughter, so there's now going to be this new bond that is formed between the two as they travel across the states and start understanding more of why Ellie is so important, what their role is, how this zombie apocalypse landscape plays a bigger part overall. And it's just such an incredibly well-written story to begin with, of just the juxtaposition of the relationship with the more innocent father-daughter with Sarah from the very beginning versus the very foul-mouthed, do what she kind of wants to do, lives life on the edge, Ellie. So it's a very different dynamic that ends up forming, but the central plot is their relationship. That's it. Zombies are second. It drives the emotions forward really, really fast, which is the whole point of it. But what is central to the plot are these two characters. And in the TV show, you got Pedro Pascal, who does a fantastic job as Joel. And then you have Bella Ramsey, who did a little bit in Game of Thrones. I don't know if she really did much else. I wouldn't say that Bella Ramsey is like my favorite actress, but she does do a good job in the role of Ellie. The in general reaction is that the TV show is a pretty faithful adaptation. And it's one of those things that, of course, with so many things, you have such a fan base, and I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't hoping that this would be a faithful adaptation. I fall into that group of fans that loved the video game, and I would say that why would you change it up much when you have such an incredible video game already? So I'd be lying if I said, oh, do what you want, take creative liberties. I wanted it to be pretty faithful, and it is. It is a pretty faithful adaptation overall. There's the infamous early episode where it's these side characters' journey that didn't play a huge role in the video game, but they take central stage and take over this entire episode. It was a kind of controversial episode. You can look into that. I think in the context of what they did with it, it made sense. Let's get some breathing room from the high intensity of this backdrop of what we've been experiencing for the first couple episodes. Let's take a step back and be able to just build up the world a little bit more, and they were able to do that. And it kind of makes sense, again, in a TV show to be able to spend that time to be able to do that. So my opinion is they took it well, and it was them just really taking that creative liberty for that one episode. It made sense in the context from what I think they did with it. I'm also going to use this time to sidetrack myself a little bit and just break down the starting point. Because the starting point here with The Last of Us is a video game. I just want to be clear on that perception. Because what I feel like whenever I would say to someone, yeah, I consider myself a gamer, I feel like immediately where their mind heads is Call of Duty, Fortnite, and like FIFA, Madden, NCAA, the sports video games. And I think the perception widely among those that don't play video games is that all you get is this quick, cheap thrill and entertainment out of them, and it doesn't do anything beyond that. And when you have some of those video games, a lot of that, I would say, I kind of agree that a lot of those are not really too engrossing in terms of what you're doing with them. But even on that point, how different and degrading are performing these activities than your hobby? I think there's an unfair perception. Even with just we'll call them cheap thrill video games. Maybe people will kill me for calling some of those video games cheap thrills. But beyond that, what I really think is the level that people don't really take into consideration, which is all the time that it takes to build up so many of these worlds and so many and so much of what is done for these video games and all of the cultural inspirations. Growing up, played a lot of Pokemon, and a lot of the Pokemon themselves, whether it's simply in the name or the design or their backstory, takes a lot of real life inspiration. A lot of stuff that maybe I was a little bit familiar with. There's of course a lot of Japanese stuff that I was not familiar with, and there's just a lot that you can be engrossed with from the real life aspect of that. There's also just the point of I was able to connect Pokemon have natures, like the adamant nature. Well, I found that on like a vocabulary test in English class, right? And instead of just having a simple definition to try to memorize, now I was actually able to make that connection to this video game that I played, and was able to relate that back to it. So there are also roots of words that I was grasping at a better level. And then you get video games such as Uncharted and Assassin's Creed that base locations off of real world places. And it's absolutely gorgeous to experience, for one thing, but they do a really thorough job of actually making sure that when you're looking at Venice in Assassin's Creed back during the Renaissance period, that it looks like how it should. You also just start throwing these assassins in there too. So to me, there's also a lot of value that you can get from real life cultural inspirations. And then, on top of all of that, I would say series that come to mind would be like Mass Effect, BioShock, Xenoblade Chronicles. You take these series and you see just how aesthetically clean and cool that they are, and you take these engrossing stories. Final Fantasy, some of those games have some of the most just engrossing stories that can bring you to tears. So that you have what I would consider like some top tier video games that completely engross you in what they do, and you're going to spend a huge time commitment growing with these characters. And no one ever questions if you say, yeah, I like to read books. I would say that the experience is very similar with a lot of these video games. When someone says, I like to play video games, there's a lot of the same values that you can actually get from both the books and the video games. All of that really to say is that across all forms of mediums, comics, books, TVs, movies, podcasts, journals, pigeons, Telegram, whatever. Across all forms of mediums, I think The Last of Us is one of the most powerful stories that I've ever seen. So with that being said, when it comes to the video game versus the TV show, I do take the video game experience over on this one. I think especially on my second playthrough, it's about 3/4 of the way through. There's a few different sections, and this is the section where Ellie gets entangled with a group of cannibals. The ending of that section, I won't spoil what happens, but the ending of that section, especially on my second playthrough, especially when it was such trials and tribulations playing through the hard difficulty, and then this moment happens at the end, and oh man, even just thinking about it starts giving me goosebumps. It's just incredible storytelling. What it calls back to hit me harder this time. I actually think that it could have been a bit more apparent. There's this one callback I'm thinking of in particular that they could have thrown in more, but even then, it's subtle and it's super powerful. And they actually keep that same moment in the TV show, and I definitely had the same complaint, except even more so. It didn't hit me as hard in the TV show. I mean, I already knew it was coming in many ways. I was looking forward to being like, ooh, you're going to make me cry? It didn't make me cry, but I think part of that was they didn't keep aligning the callback that I was looking for, so that when it got pulled up in the moment, that would have really hit. I think it was a small missed opportunity, but it's still a great moment overall. Maybe I'll send you a link to the clip I'm talking about, or I'll look into things a little bit later. But just know, there's just an awesome moment that happens. So I do take the video game experience on this one, but to me there are two great barriers to entry. The first thing is, when you aren't a gamer and when you aren't familiar with video games, getting the controller down and that hand-eye coordination of the button mapping and where everything is, coordinating with the character, the camera angle, it can be very frustrating, and it's something that the normal difficulty mode on a video game is built with a gamer in mind, with, I would say, all of the mature games. That's just the nature of how it is. So if you're inexperienced, you gotta really swipe down on that difficulty level and do a story mode or an easy mode just to handle things properly. So that's a huge barrier to entry and can really degrade your experience if you aren't on the proper difficulty setting. I would say that there's been a lot of strides with video games to make them way more accessible in general, and I think that's been a great aspect that has happened in the industry. The other barrier to entry simply is the console itself. With The Last of Us, that is exclusive to PlayStation. Maybe you have an Xbox, can't play The Last of Us. It's only on PlayStation. That's a huge purchase of a console to either have a PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5. Same thing with all the Nintendo games. You need a Nintendo Switch. Xbox exclusives. If you care about those, you need the Xbox. Maybe you have a good PC that you can use for the games as well. So again, just the price point as well, not to mention the time commitment and the ability to play the video games. Lots of barriers to entry, whereas with the TV show, you're just sitting on the couch. You can get maxed and stream The Last of Us, I think probably for like $8 a month, and you could easily finish the entire show within a single month. It can't get easier than that. So even if I feel like I want someone to enjoy something the same way that I did, I can also live with the fact that at the end of the day, if they watch the show, we can still talk about The Last of Us. And I can fill them in on the video game, and they can compare and contrast notes with me on the TV show, and even give me the perspective of, hey, I watched the show, this is what I thought story-wise, and it's not biased at all from the video game perspective. You have a fresh perspective now that you can debate and communicate with. So I have my own quarrels internally about when you fall in love with a story or you fall in love with this world or a particular character. And even, not even just talking about the transfer from mediums to mediums, even just sequels of, hey, your character survived this, and like, awesome, did they get their happy ending? I'm so happy for them, I'm glad everything worked out in the end. Oh, there's a sequel now? Well, I don't want to see my characters suffer. I don't want those trials and tribulations with the prospect that maybe they throw the twist and they switch things up and they want to bring on new characters, and so they kill off the original cast, right? Like, there's that legitimate fear of the unknown, and we like to know when things work out for the characters that we've fallen in love with. I fall into that as well. So that you know, goes into the interpretation of books to films, video games to series. What are they going to do? Is the director, are the actors, are they giving these interviews saying, oh yeah, you know, I really wanted to make it my own? And you're like, no, don't do that. Just play the character how I know the character. Make them be what I love, right? There's a lot of that goes on, but it's that back and forth of the creative liberties of, you know, an actor wanting to, of course, infuse themselves into the character and try to give them their own traits, try to have a new spin. There's a lot of back and forth of what is the right balance that we want, that is right, and maybe there's some swing and misses that are associated with it. But especially when you think of like books, you create so much in your mind, and then for someone to attempt to then portray that on screen, that's very vulnerable. That's someone that's kind of broken into your personal space and said, this is how it actually is versus what you interpret. So that can be quite daunting of a theme to get behind. So I do understand that aspect. I don't think it's something that people have, you know, verbalized that so much, right? I hope that we can use this as an opportunity then to say, maybe this is our way to add on to the existing lore. Maybe there was a controversial scene of what happened in the book, and we can change things up. Or simply just put a new spin on it. And whatever way that is, books are also time commitments. And so when we have something that is now transformed, now we are essentially saying we have a more accessible medium to showcase this story that is obviously beloved to so many fans of whatever it is that they read, the series, whatever. But of course, this isn't just on us, the book readers, to change our mindsets. This is a two-way road, and studios also have to make changes. I think there is more of an avenue for studios to market stuff as more like reimaginings than simply adaptations. And if they are more upfront of, hey, we're trying to be creatively different, I can understand how that may not be the most money-making marketing move that you can possibly make. But in the long run, instead of maybe having a few extra million from the opening haul, it might give you more. It might give you more leeway with the fan base that comes back for more. And so if you stretch it out, I think there is some ways to argue that financially it could still make sense. There's also, of course, so much discussion that happens with how much are the authors or the original owners involved with that transferring process. And you get so many times where the author kind of gets apparently kicked out by the studios and aren't involved in decision-making processes, and that's where the communication tends to break down. Or the stuff that tends to work really well tends to get a lot of input from those original creators, and that's something that I think is why we've seen so many video game movies in particular fail, is not getting correct input either from the video game studios that helped create them, or just understanding fundamentally why did the fan base of the video game actually enjoy that? What aspects of that then can we transfer to the movie, rather than simply putting the familiar looking character but changing up how we see them, which is not what the fan base actually enjoyed. There also just is an aspect that movie studios haven't put their fullest effort into creating the best product, and instead seeing just the dollar sign at the front, at the end. They haven't seen the dollar sign. they are just looking at the dollar sign to say, oh, this thing made money. Me make money when make movie. Me do that. And it's sad to see when the creativity goes out the window. This is from a business major speaking too. I think the whole purpose and genesis behind this video is I've heard so many grumblings from people that just say how the movie didn't hold up to the book. And there's a healthy dosage of that is inevitable. But if you take the movie for what it is, a 2-hour excursion in escapism, then I think you'll be able to translate that much better and enjoy it for what it is. And hey, even if you can't do that, even if you still just look at a movie and you see how much it fails in comparison to the book that you read, you can always reread the book and tell people to do the same. I think that's it for me. See ya.